The 1950s and 1960s in America were marked by the rise of the civil rights movement, a time when African Americans, alongside other marginalized groups, fought for justice, equality, and an end to institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination. The movement was driven by both individual acts of courage and collective efforts to change the social and legal landscape of the United States. One of the most iconic figures of this era was Rosa Parks, whose act of defiance in 1955 became a catalyst for the civil rights movement. Parks, a black woman, refused to give up her seat to a white man on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in violation of the segregation laws that required black passengers to give up their seats to white passengers. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, a 381-day protest led by a young Martin Luther King Jr., who emerged as a prominent leader of the movement. The boycott, which aimed to desegregate public transportation, proved the power of collective action and nonviolent resistance. It culminated in a Supreme Court ruling that declared segregation on public buses unconstitutional. Another defining moment in the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, delivered during the March on Washington in 1963. This march, one of the largest demonstrations in American history, brought together more than 250,000 people to demand an end to racial injustice and economic inequality. King's speech, delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, remains one of the most powerful and eloquent expressions of the movement's goals: equality, justice, and the realization of the American dream for all people, regardless of race. The sit-ins of the 1960s were another tactic employed by civil rights activists. In 1960, for black students from North Carolina, L&T University sat at a segregated lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, demanding to be served. This act of nonviolent protest inspired similar sit-ins across the country, challenging racial segregation in public places such as restaurants, hotels, and libraries. The sit-ins showed the power of peaceful resistance and led to the desegregation of many public accommodations. The movement also saw significant marches, such as the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965, which were crucial in securing voting rights for African Americans. The marches were spurred by the brutal attack on peaceful protesters by law enforcement officers during the first March on Bloody Sunday in Selma. This violent act caught national attention and galvanized support for voting rights. The sit-ins of the 1960s were another tactic employed by civil rights activists. In 1960, for black students from North Carolina, L&T University sat at a segregated lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, demanding to be served. This act of nonviolent protest inspired similar sit-ins across the country, challenging racial segregation in public places such as restaurants, hotels, and libraries. The sit-ins showed the power of peaceful resistance and led to the desegregation of many public accommodations. The courage of the marchers, combined with public outrage over the violence, led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. In terms of legislative victories, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was one of the most significant pieces of legislation in American history. This landmark law outlawed discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in employment, education, and public accommodations. It also gave the federal government the authority to enforce desegregation and ensured that civil rights would be protected through legal action. The Civil Rights Act not only marked a victory for African Americans, but also set the stage for future movements for equality for other marginalized groups, including women, LGBTQ+ individuals, and people with disabilities. Actions, led by individuals like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. and countless others, brought about significant changes in American society. But the civil rights movement was not solely the work of a few famous figures. It was also the result of grassroots efforts by ordinary African Americans, who risked their lives and faced violence, arrest, and discrimination in their fight for equality. The 1960s also saw the rise of more radical elements of the civil rights movement, including the Black Panther Party, which advocated for self-defense and black empowerment, particularly in response to police brutality and systemic inequality. While the more radical approaches differed from the nonviolent philosophy of King and others, they represented the growing frustration with the slow pace of change and the persistence of racism. Overall, the 1950s and 1960s were years of profound social, cultural, and political transformation in the United States. The civil rights movement, with its mixture of nonviolent resistance, legal challenges, and grassroots activism, reshaped the national consciousness and resulted in groundbreaking legislation. While significant progress was made, the struggles of the civil rights movement laid the foundation for future social justice movements, reminding Americans that the fight for equality is ongoing. The victories of this era, while transformative, were just steps toward a future where racial justice and equality would continue to be pursued and, ideally, today, achieved. The United States is a nation of diversity and innovation. Its democratic ideals and commitment to freedom continue to inspire people worldwide. Challenges persist, but the story of America is one of resilience, a country that evolves and adapts, striving to uphold its founding principles while embracing change. In essence, the story of the United States is a testament to the power of hope, determination, and the pursuit of a better future. It is a journey marked by triumphs and trials, a nation constantly reinventing itself while remaining a symbol of opportunity and possibility for millions around the globe. The latter part of the 20th century and the early 21st century saw the United States as a leader in technological innovation and cultural influence. Silicon Valley became the hub of the tech revolution, giving rise to companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Hollywood and the music industry brought American culture to the world, while advancements in space exploration, like the Apollo moon landing in 1969, showcased the nation's scientific achievements. However, the United States has also faced challenges. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 marked a tragic moment in modern history, leading to the global war on terror and reshaping national security policies. Economic recessions, social polarization, and debates over issues like healthcare, climate change, and immigration continue to test the nation's unity and resolve. The 20th century was a period of profound change and global influence for the United States. World War I saw the country emerge as a significant global power, and its involvement in World War II solidified its leadership on the world stage. After the war, the U.S. became a central player in rebuilding efforts and the establishment of institutions like the United Nations. The Cold War era, 1947–1991, brought a tense rivalry with the Soviet Union, shaping foreign and domestic policies for decades. Domestically, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s was a pivotal moment in American history. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks spearheaded efforts to dismantle racial segregation and ensure equal rights for African Americans. Landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 represented significant progress in the fight for equality. As the young nation expanded westward, it acquired vast territories through purchases, treaties, and wars. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, brokered by President Thomas Jefferson, doubled the country's size. However, this expansion came with significant challenges, including conflicts with Native American tribes and debates over slavery. The Civil War, 1861–1865, was a turning point in American history, fought over states' rights and the institution of slavery. The war ultimately preserved the Union and led to the abolition of slavery through the 13th Amendment. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the United States rise as an industrial power. Immigrants flocked to the country, bringing diverse cultures and fueling economic growth. Innovations like the light bulb, telephone, and automobile transformed daily life. However, rapid industrialization also led to social inequalities and labor struggles. Movements like the Progressive Era sought to address these issues through reforms in education, labor, and women's suffrage, culminating in the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote in 1920. The story of the United States is one of transformation, resilience, and progress, a nation that rose from humble beginnings to become a global powerhouse. This 10-minute exploration takes us through the defining chapters of America's journey, showcasing its growth, challenges, and achievements. The United States began as a group of 13 British colonies along the Atlantic coast. In the 18th century, tensions between these colonies and the British Crown grew due to issues like taxation without representation. This discontent led to the American Revolution, 1775–1783, a bold fight for independence. The Declaration of Independence in 1776, authored primarily by Thomas Jefferson, was a profound statement of liberty and equality, marking the birth of a new nation. After the war, the U.S. Constitution was drafted in 1787, establishing a framework for governance that balanced power between the federal government and individual states. The sit-ins of the 1960s were another tactic employed by civil rights activists. In 1960, for black students from North Carolina, L&T University sat at a segregated lunch counter